My brother dumped his kids on me and told me that he would take them back once they turned 18. Now, he is about to learn what consequences are. So last Friday, I'm working from home when I hear my doorbell going crazy. I open it and there's my brother Dan with his 2 kids, Lily, who's 3, and Ben, who just turned 2. They've got these little suitcases and Dan's already walking back to his car. I'm like, what's going on? He turns around and goes, oh good, you're home. So I've been thinking, and you're 32 with no kids and that big house all to yourself. These 2 need stability and you need purpose in your life. I'll pick them up when Lily turns 18. I'm standing there thinking this is some weird joke, but he keeps talking. I already told them you're their new mommy. Their stuff is all packed. Bedtime is 8, Ben still needs pull-ups at night, and Lily won't eat vegetables unless you mix them into mac and cheese. I literally cannot speak. He goes, look, I know this is sudden, but I'm doing you a favor here. You always complain about being single and having no family of your own. Now you get to experience motherhood without having to find a man first. You should be thanking me. Then he actually says, I need to focus on my music career without distractions. Kids don't belong in a recording studio environment. You have that stable accounting job and all that free time after 5. It's perfect. I finally managed to say, Dan, you can't just leave your children here. He's already getting in his car and goes, sure I can. You're their aunt. Who else would take them? Mom and Dad are too old. Besides, you owe me for letting you stay with me that summer after college. That was literally 10 years ago, and I paid him rent. He drives off while I'm standing there with 2 crying toddlers. I bring them inside because what else am I going to do? Leave them on the porch? They're scared and asking for daddy. I give them juice boxes and put on cartoons while I call Dan. No answer. I call 15 times. Nothing. I text him that he needs to come back immediately. He texts back, stop being selfish. Those kids need you. I'm pacing around my living room trying to figure out what to do. I can't call the cops on my own brother. My parents live 3 states away and my mom has health problems. The kids are now destroying my living room and Ben has peed on my couch. That's when I get really calm and start thinking. Dan lives in this converted garage apartment behind his friend's house about 20 minutes away. He pays basically nothing because he supposedly helps with maintenance, but really he just plays guitar all day and posts videos nobody watches. His girlfriend Ashley left him 6 months ago because she got tired of supporting all 3 of them while he pursued his passion. She moved back to her parents' place in Michigan. Here's what Dan doesn't know. Ashley and I still talk. She's been telling me how he keeps begging her to come back, promising he'll change, get a real job, be responsible. She's been thinking about giving him another chance because she misses the kids. So while Lily and Ben are eating goldfish crackers off my coffee table, I call Ashley. I tell her exactly what Dan just did. She's quiet for a long time, then goes, he did what? I explain everything, how he literally abandoned them on my doorstep to focus on his music. She's furious. I've been killing myself working double shifts thinking maybe he's finally growing up and he dumps the kids on you. Then she says something that makes me smile. You know what? Bring them here. All their stuff too. My parents have been dying to meet their grandkids anyway. Ashley's parents are loaded. Like own 3 businesses loaded. They've been begging Ashley to move back home permanently, and apparently they've already set up rooms for the kids in case she gets custody. So I pack both kids into my car with all their stuff. Dan didn't even pack them enough clothes. Just random mismatched things thrown into suitcases. The drive to Michigan takes 6 hours. I have to stop 4 times for bathroom breaks and snacks. Ben throws up twice. Lily cries for daddy for the first 3 hours. When we get there, Ashley's waiting outside with her parents. Her mom immediately scoops up Ben and her dad picks up Lily. They're so happy to see the kids, and the kids remember Ashley and run to her. Ashley looks at me and goes, Dan's about to learn what consequences are. Ashley's parents bring us all inside and their house is huge. Like way bigger than I expected. The living room has these soft couches and there are toys already set up in the corner. Iris takes Ben straight to the kitchen for some milk, while Dominic carries Lily upstairs to show her the room they set up. I'm just standing there with my overnight bag feeling like I might fall over from how tired I am. The drive was so long and my brain won't stop going over everything that happened. Ashley touches my arm and tells me to sit down. She brings me water and we just sit there for a minute while her parents handle the kids. I can hear Lily upstairs saying something about a big bed, and Dominic's voice is so gentle with her. Ben is in the kitchen with Iris and he's not crying anymore. After about 20 minutes, both kids are in pajamas and Iris reads them a story in the room upstairs. They fall asleep so fast. Ashley and I go back downstairs and just sit at the kitchen table. She makes tea even though neither of us really drinks tea. We're both too wired to sleep. She tells me she's been thinking about going for custody for months now. She says Dan kept promising he'd get his act together, and she kept believing him because she wanted the kids to have their dad. But he never changed. He'd get a job and quit after 2 weeks. He'd promised to help more with the kids and then spend all day recording guitar videos. She supported all 3 of them for almost 2 years before she finally left. She moved back here 6 months ago, and it's been killing her being away from Lily and Ben. Her parents have been telling her to fight for them, but she felt guilty. Like maybe she was being selfish for wanting them when they had their actual dad. I tell her what Dan did isn't normal. Normal parents don't dump their kids on someone's doorstep and drive away. She starts crying and says she knows, but she kept hoping he'd wake up and realize what he had. Now she's done hoping. She tells me her parents already talked to a lawyer a few weeks ago just in case. They knew this was coming. We talk until almost 3 in the morning. I finally go to the guest room and pass out. The next morning, I wake up to voices downstairs and the smell of food cooking. I check my phone and it's almost 9. I never sleep that late. I go downstairs and Iris is making this huge breakfast. Eggs, bacon, pancakes, and she's got cut up fruit in little bowls. The kids are already at the table in their chairs. Lily has a plate with pancakes and I see green stuff mixed in and she's eating it. I ask what that is and Iris says it's spinach pancakes. She just blends spinach into the batter and adds a little honey. Lily is eating them without any fight. Ben has scrambled eggs with cheese and little pieces of broccoli mixed in, and he's shoveling it in his mouth. I sit down and Iris gives me a plate. Ashley comes in from the backyard where she was on the phone. She sits next to me and we all eat together. The kids are so calm. They're not whining or throwing food or hitting each other. Lily asks if they can go play outside after breakfast, and Iris says yes. Ben drinks his milk without spilling it everywhere. I'm watching them and something clicks in my head. They were always stressed at Dan's place, always on edge. I thought that was just how toddlers were because I don't have kids. But they're different here. Relaxed. They feel safe. Ashley sees me watching and she knows what I'm thinking. After breakfast, Dominic comes in from his home office. He sits down with his coffee and asks me about the drive. I tell him it was long but fine. Then he says he wants to help. He tells Ashley he'll pay for whatever lawyer she needs. He says he's been wanting to do this for months. Ashley tried to wait and see if Dan would step up on his own, but Dominic thinks that ship has sailed. He says any man who abandons his kids like that doesn't deserve them. I agree. Dominic makes a phone call right there at the table and sets up a meeting with some family lawyer for Monday. Everything is moving so fast. Later that morning, I know I have to call Dan. I've been avoiding it, but he needs to know where his kids are. I go outside on the back porch and dial his number. He answers on the first ring. I tell him the kids are with Ashley in Michigan. He loses it. Starts screaming at me through the phone about how I kidnapped his children. I try to explain that I brought them to their mother figure who actually wants them, but he's not listening. He's yelling that I had no right to take them out of state. He says he's calling the police. He says I'm going to jail for kidnapping. I tell him he's the one who abandoned them on my doorstep. He says that's not what happened. He says he was just asking me to watch them for a little bit. I ask him how long a little bit is and he doesn't answer. He says 15 years isn't the point. He keeps saying I stole his kids and he's going to make me pay. Ashley must hear him yelling because she comes outside. I'm shaking, I'm so mad. She takes the phone from me. She tells Dan exactly what she thinks of him. She says he dumped 2 toddlers on his sister's porch and drove away. She says she's been working double shifts thinking maybe he was finally growing up and he does this. He tries to backtrack. His voice changes and he says it was just temporary. He says he just needed a few days to focus on his music. Ashley says she's not stupid. She tells him she knows about the text where he said he'd take them back when Lily turned 18. He starts stammering and saying that was a joke. Nobody is buying it. She tells him the kids are staying with her, and if he has a problem with that, he can take it up with her lawyer. Then she hangs up on him. We think that's the end of it, but 2 hours later, there's a knock on the door. Dominic answers, and it's 2 police officers. Dan actually called the cops. The officers ask to speak with Ashley. She invites them in and explains the whole situation. She tells them about Dan showing up at my house Friday and leaving the kids there. She shows them the text between me and Dan. One officer reads the text where Dan says he'll pick them up when Lily turns 18. The officer looks at his partner and shakes his head. They ask where the kids are now, and Ashley says they're upstairs napping. The officers say this is a civil custody matter and they can't do anything. One of them asks for Dan's number. He calls Dan right there from the living room, and I can hear Dan's voice getting loud on the other end. The officer tells him he should be ashamed of himself for abandoning his kids like that. He says Dan can't just dump his children somewhere and expect everyone to go along with it. He tells Dan if he wants custody, he needs to go through the courts like everyone else. Then he hangs up. The officers tell Ashley to document everything and get a lawyer. They leave and we all just stand there. Iris makes more tea. Nobody really knows what to say. Sunday goes by in a blur. The kids play in the backyard. Ashley takes them to a park nearby. I help Iris with laundry and we fold tiny shirts and pants. It feels so normal and so weird at the same time. Monday morning comes and I have to drive back home. I have work and I've already missed Friday. Ashley hugs me at the door and thanks me for bringing them here. The kids wave goodbye from the window. The drive back is 6 hours and I have a lot of time to think. I'm so mad at Dan. He put me in this horrible position. He disrupted my entire life. He scared his own children. And for what? So he could play guitar without distractions? I gripped the steering wheel so hard my hands hurt. I stop for gas and coffee and just sit in the parking lot for a while. My phone has like 15 missed calls from Dan. I don't listen to any of the voicemails. I get home late Monday afternoon and go straight to bed. Tuesday morning, I drag myself to work. I sit at my desk with spreadsheets open on my computer and I can't focus on any of it. The numbers blur together. My boss stops by my desk around 10 and asks if I'm okay. I must look terrible. I end up telling her the whole story. She just stares at me with her mouth open. She asks if I'm serious. I show her some of the texts from Daniel. She says she's never heard of anyone doing something like that. She tells me to take the rest of the day off if I need to, but I say I'm fine. I'm not fine. I keep checking my phone for updates from Ashley. Around noon, I get a text from Ashley. She's taking the kids to a pediatrician because she doesn't think they've had proper checkups. I text back asking what she means. She says she looked through the papers Dan packed and there's no record of any doctor visits in over a year. A few hours later, she texts again. Ben needed 3 shots he was overdue for. Lily has a cavity that's been sitting there for months untreated. She's scheduling a dentist appointment for next week. I feel sick reading this. Dan couldn't even take care of basic medical stuff. What else was he not doing? I text back asking if the kids are okay. She says they're fine now, but the doctor was concerned about the neglect. She's documenting everything for the lawyer. Dan won't stop calling and texting me. His messages go back and forth between angry and pathetic. One text says I better bring his kids back right now. The next one says he just needed a break and everyone is overreacting. Another one says I ruined his life. Then one says he's sorry and can I please just talk to him? I read them all, but I stop responding. Every conversation with him just goes in circles. He never takes responsibility for anything. It's always someone else's fault. I'm done with it. I block his number Wednesday night after he calls me 17 times in a row. Ashley says he's doing the same thing to her, but she blocked him days ago. Her lawyer told her not to engage with him at all. Everything needs to go through legal channels now. The kids are safe. That's what matters. Dan made his choice when he drove away from my house. Now he gets to live with it. Thursday morning, I wake up to a text from Ashley saying her parents hired a lawyer. Some woman named Piper Frost who does custody cases. I'm making coffee when Ashley calls and puts me on speaker so I can hear what Piper is telling them. The lawyer talks fast and direct. She says Dan can't legally just give away his parental rights like that. What he did could be considered child abandonment under Michigan law. She's already drafting paperwork for emergency temporary custody. Ashley's parents are sitting right there, and I can hear Iris asking questions about timelines and what documentation they need. Piper tells them to save every text message, every missed call, every piece of evidence showing Dan's pattern of neglect. I tell them about the medical records Ashley found, the missed shots, and the cavity. Piper says that's perfect. Document everything. The call ends, and I sit there with my coffee getting cold. This is really happening. Dan is about to face actual legal consequences. 2 days later, I'm working from home again when my phone rings. It's my mom. I almost don't answer because I know Dan got to her. She starts talking before I can even say hello. She's upset with me for interfering in Dan's life. She thinks I should have just kept the kids at my house like Dan wanted. She says family helps family, and I'm making everything worse by getting Ashley involved. I let her talk for a minute, and then I cut her off. I explain that Dan didn't ask me to babysit. He literally abandoned his children on my doorstep and drove away. He told me he'd pick them up when Lily turned 18. He left them crying and scared and then blocked my calls. My mom goes quiet. I keep talking. I tell her about the medical neglect, the missed vaccines, the untreated cavity. I tell her Dan wasn't asking for help. He was dumping his responsibility because he wanted to focus on his music career. She doesn't say anything for a long time. Then she admits she knew Dan was struggling, but she didn't realize it was this bad. She thought maybe he was just overwhelmed and needed a break. I tell her this wasn't a break. This was abandonment. My dad gets on the phone. He's calmer than Mom. He says Dan has always been irresponsible, but this crosses a line. He remembers all the times Dan quit jobs or bailed on commitments. He says he wishes he and Mom could help more, but with Mom's health issues, they can't take on 2 toddlers. I tell him I understand, and that Ashley is doing an amazing job. The kids are safe and happy. So Dad says he's proud of me for making the hard choice to get them somewhere stable. After we hang up, I feel exhausted. My own parents almost took Dan's side. They almost believed his version where I'm the bad guy. That afternoon, Ashley sends me videos. The first one shows Lily on a huge swing set in the backyard. She's laughing and kicking her legs. The second video is Ben chasing bubbles that Dominic is blowing. He's giggling and stumbling around trying to catch them. Both kids look happier than I ever saw them at Dan's apartment. Their faces are relaxed. They're not scared or stressed. I watched the videos 3 times. This is what normal childhood looks like. This is what they deserved all along. The following Wednesday, Ashley texts me that Child Welfare Services contacted her. Dan filed a complaint claiming she kidnapped his kids. She has to explain the whole situation to a caseworker named Bodie Holloway. She's nervous about it, but Piper told her to be completely honest about everything. The next day, Bodie comes to evaluate Ashley's living situation. Ashley texts me updates throughout the visit. He interviews her parents. He tours the house and sees the kids' rooms. He watches Ashley interact with Lily and Ben. He asks about Dan's history, and Ashley tells him everything. The 6 months she supported everyone while Dan played guitar. The times he forgot to feed the kids. The way he'd get annoyed when they interrupted his recording sessions. Bodie takes notes on everything. Ashley says he seems professional but not cold. Like he's seen cases like this before, and he knows what real neglect looks like. At the end of the visit, he tells Ashley the kids are clearly in a stable, safe environment. He'll include that in his report. 2 days later, Dan shows up at Ashley's parents' house. Ashley calls me right after it happens, still shaking. She says Dan just appeared at the front door demanding to see his kids. Dominic was the one who answered. He stood on the porch and told Dan he could see them with supervision. Dan tried to push past him, but Dominic is a big guy and he didn't move. Dan started yelling about his rights as a father. Dominic told him he gave up those rights when he abandoned them. Dan backed down but kept shouting from the driveway. The neighbors came out to see what was happening. Eventually Dan left, but not before screaming that he'd get his kids back and everyone would be sorry. The supervised visit gets scheduled for the following Monday. Piper arranges it to happen in Ashley's parents' living room with everyone present. Ashley texts me before it starts saying she's dreading it. Afterward, she calls me and tells me everything. Dan showed up 15 minutes late. He came in and tried to hug the kids, but they stayed close to Ashley. Lily looked at him and asked why he left them. Dan didn't have a good answer. He mumbled something about needing to work on his music, and that they'd understand when they were older. Ben started playing with blocks and barely looked at Dan. Dan tried to engage them, but they weren't interested. He asked Lily about her day, and she gave one-word answers. He tried to show Ben a video on his phone, but Ben wandered away. The whole thing was awkward and tense. After 20 minutes, Dan got frustrated. The kids were more interested in playing with Ashley than talking to him. He stood up and said he was leaving. He told everyone they'd turned his children against him. He said they were poisoning Lily and Ben's minds. Ashley's dad told him the kids weren't against him. They just felt safe without him. Dan left angry, slamming the door behind him. Ashley said the kids barely reacted to him leaving. Lily went back to her coloring book. Ben asked for a snack. It was like Dan was just some stranger who stopped by, not their father. Ashley sounded sad about it, but also relieved. She said it proved what everyone already knew. Dan couldn't handle being a parent when it required actual effort and attention. He wanted kids who adored him without him having to do any of the work. The next morning, Piper calls Ashley and tells her they need to move fast on emergency custody. She explains that what Dan did counts as child abandonment under Michigan law, and they can use that to get temporary custody right away, while the full case goes through the courts. Ashley puts her on speaker so I can hear too before I drive home. Piper says she'll file the paperwork that afternoon, and they should have a hearing date within 2 weeks. She needs statements from both of us about what happened that Friday, plus documentation of everything since then. Ashley already has records from the pediatrician visit showing the missed vaccines and untreated cavity. Piper sounds confident when she tells us this is one of the clearest cases she's handled. A parent can't just drop kids off and disappear for weeks. I drive back home that day and get back to my normal work routine, but I'm checking my phone constantly for updates from Ashley and Piper. 3 days later, Ashley texts me that Dan hired a lawyer. Some guy his friend knows who does general practice stuff. His lawyer already sent Piper a letter claiming this whole thing is a big misunderstanding. According to him, Dan was just asking his sister for temporary help with childcare, and everyone overreacted. The letter says Dan never intended to abandon his children, and he's been trying to work out a reasonable arrangement. I actually laugh when Ashley sends me a photo of the letter. Dan told me he'd pick them up when Lily turned 18. That's not asking for help with childcare. That's dumping your kids and walking away. Piper responds to Dan's lawyer with copies of my texts from that day, screenshots of Dan's message telling me to stop being selfish, and a detailed timeline of everything that happened. She also includes the pediatrician's report and statements from Ashley about the 6 months she supported everyone while Dan played guitar. Dan's lawyer goes quiet after that. A week after I got back home, Bodie calls me to set up a time for my official statement. He comes to my house on a Tuesday evening after work and sits at my kitchen table with a recorder and a notepad. He asks me to describe exactly what happened that Friday, starting from when I heard the doorbell. I tell him everything. How Dan showed up with the kids and their little suitcases. How he was already walking back to his car before I even opened the door. How he told me I needed purpose in my life and he'd pick them up when Lily turned 18. Bodie doesn't interrupt, just takes notes and nods. I describe how Dan said kids don't belong in a recording studio environment and he needed to focus on his music career. How he brought up me staying with him 10 years ago like I owed him. How he drove away while his kids were crying on my porch. Bodie's expression gets more serious as I talk. He asks specific questions about what Dan said word for word. He asks if Dan seemed impaired or having a mental health crisis. I tell him no, Dan seemed completely normal, just selfish. He was calm and matter-of-fact about leaving his kids, like he'd made a decision and expected everyone to go along with it. Bodhi asks about my relationship with Dan before this happened. I explain that we were never super close, but we got along okay. I saw him and the kids maybe once a month. I knew Ashley had left him, but I didn't know things were this bad. The whole statement takes about 90 minutes. At the end, Bodhi tells me this will be part of the evidence for the custody case. He says my account matches everything Ashley told him and all the documentation they have. 2 weeks after Piper filed the paperwork, the emergency custody hearing happens. I take 2 days off work and drive back to Michigan. The hearing is in family court on a Thursday morning. Ashley is nervous and her parents are there supporting her. Piper meets us outside the courtroom and goes over what will happen. The judge will hear from both sides and look at the evidence, then decide on temporary custody until the full case can be heard. Dan shows up 15 minutes late with his lawyer. He's wearing jeans and a wrinkled button-down shirt. His lawyer looks annoyed that he's late. We all go into the courtroom and it's smaller than I expected. Just the judge's bench, a table for each side, and a few rows of seats. The judge is a woman probably in her 50s who looks tired. Piper presents our case first. She walks the judge through everything that happened, starting with Dan showing up at my door. She enters my statement as evidence along with the text messages and photos of the kids' suitcases. She presents the pediatrician's report showing medical neglect. She has Ashley's account of the 6 months she supported the family. She has Bodhi's evaluation report showing the kids are in a safe, stable environment now. Dan's lawyer tries to argue that Dan was overwhelmed and made a poor decision in a moment of stress. He claims Dan immediately regretted it and has been trying to work out an arrangement. Piper asks why Dan didn't come back for his kids that same day if he regretted it. Why he didn't respond to my 15 phone calls. Why he texted me to stop being selfish instead of coming to get his children. Dan's lawyer doesn't have good answers. Then I have to testify. Piper asks me to describe what happened, and I tell the judge the same thing I told Bodhi. The judge asks me directly if Dan said he would pick the kids up when Lily turned 18. I say yes. Those were his exact words. She asks if he seemed to be joking or exaggerating. I say no. He was completely serious. He had their stuff packed and he drove away. The judge looks at Dan and asks if he wants to testify. His lawyer advises him not to, but Dan insists. He gets up there and immediately starts making excuses. He talks about the stress of being a single parent and trying to build his music career. He says he thought his sister would be happy to help out since she's always complaining about being lonely. The judge cuts him off and asks if he told me I needed purpose in my life. Dan admits he said something like that. She asks if he told me he'd pick up his kids when Lily turned 18. Dan tries to claim he was being dramatic and didn't mean it literally. The judge doesn't look convinced. She asks why he didn't come back that same day. Dan says he thought I would call him when I calmed down and we could talk reasonably. The judge asks why he didn't answer my 15 phone calls. Dan doesn't have an answer for that. The whole hearing takes about 2 hours. At the end, the judge says she's granting Ashley temporary custody immediately. She says Dan's actions constitute child abandonment, and the children's welfare requires them to remain in their current stable environment. Dan sits there looking shocked, like he genuinely didn't think there would be consequences. His lawyer tries to argue for immediate visitation rights. The judge shuts that down fast. She orders supervised visits only until a full evaluation is done. She wants reports from the court monitor about Dan's interactions with the kids. She sets a date for the full custody hearing 3 months out. Dan's face goes red and he starts to stand up, but his lawyer pulls him back down. After the judge leaves, Dan corners me in the parking lot. He's furious and asking why I'm doing this to him. I tell him I'm not doing anything. He did this to himself when he dumped his kids and drove away. He says I'm ruining his life over one mistake. I tell him abandoning your children isn't a mistake, it's a choice. He starts yelling that I'm a terrible sister and I've always been jealous of him. Ashley's dad, Dominic, steps between us and tells Dan to leave. Dan storms off to his car still yelling. I'm shaking but also relieved it's over. My relationship with Dan is completely destroyed after that. He sends me angry texts all weekend calling me a traitor. He says I ruined his life and turned everyone against him. He says I'll regret this when he gets his kids back and cuts me out of their lives forever. I read the first few messages and then block his number. I'm done with his manipulation and blame shifting. He had chance after chance to be a decent father and he chose his music career every single time. 3 weeks after the custody hearing, Ashley calls me one evening sounding emotional. She tells me the kids are starting to call her mama. It happened naturally. Lily said it first when Ashley was putting her to bed, and then Ben copied her the next morning. Ashley cried happy tears when she told me. She says her parents are amazing grandparents. They take the kids to the park every afternoon when the weather is nice. They read bedtime stories every single night. They've set up a playroom in one of the spare bedrooms with toys and books and art supplies. The kids have a routine now with regular mealtimes and bedtimes. They're not scared or anxious anymore. I visit Michigan again 4 weeks after the custody hearing. I'm amazed at how much Lily and Ben have changed. They're calmer and sleeping through the night. Lily doesn't cry for Dan anymore. Ben is talking more and using full sentences. Ashley enrolled them in a really good daycare program, and Lily's teacher tells Ashley she's thriving. She's making friends and learning her letters and numbers. The teacher says she's never seen a child adjust so well to a new environment. Ben is doing great too, playing with other kids and following directions. When I'm there that weekend, the kids are happy and relaxed. They show me their rooms and their toys. Lily draws me a picture of her family, and it's Ashley, her grandparents, and Ben. Dan isn't in it. Meanwhile, Dan's supervised visits aren't going well. Ashley tells me the court monitor has been sending reports to the judge. Dan showed up 30 minutes late to the first visit. He spent most of the second visit on his phone scrolling through social media. At the third visit, he got irritated when Ben didn't want to sit on his lap. The monitor noted that Dan seems more interested in the kids performing affection than actually connecting with them. He asks them if they miss him and gets upset when they don't say yes. He tries to get them to say they want to come home, but they just stare at him. Lily told the monitor that she likes living with Mama Ashley now. Dan got mad and said Ashley isn't their real mom. Lily started crying and the visit had to end early. The court monitor wrote in her report that Dan shows poor emotional regulation and doesn't prioritize the children's comfort over his own needs. A week later, Bodie finishes his full evaluation and sends his report to the court. Ashley forwards me a copy and I read through all 15 pages in one sitting. It's brutal. Bodie documents everything about the medical neglect, how Ben was 6 months overdue on vaccines, and Lily had an untreated cavity that required emergency dental work. He writes about Dan's converted garage apartment with 1 bedroom for 3 people and a kitchen that barely functioned. He includes notes from the supervised visits showing Dan's complete lack of parenting skills, how he doesn't know what foods his kids like or what their bedtime routine should be. The worst part is the section about Dan's priorities where Bodie writes that Dan consistently puts his music career ahead of his children's basic needs and shows no understanding of why this is harmful. The report concludes that Dan is currently unfit to provide adequate care and recommends Ashley retain custody, with only supervised visits for Dan, until he demonstrates sustained behavioral change over at least 6 months. I read the whole thing twice, and then I forwarded it to my parents with a message saying they need to see what their son actually did. My mom calls me 3 hours later and she's crying. She apologizes for initially taking Dan's side and says she had no idea things were this bad. She admits she knew Dan was struggling, but thought he just needed help with childcare, not that he was completely neglecting the kids. My dad gets on the phone and he sounds angry in a way I've never heard before. He tells me he's ashamed of Dan and offers to testify in court about Dan's history of avoiding responsibility if it would help Ashley's case. He brings up things from years ago, how Dan quit every job after a few months, how he borrowed money from them constantly and never paid it back, how he always had an excuse for why nothing was ever his fault. My mom says she's going to call Ashley directly to apologize and ask what she can do to help. 2 days later, Ashley tells me my mom called and they talked for over an hour. My mom apologized for doubting her and said she supports Ashley getting full custody. She even offered to visit Michigan to see the kids in their new home, which Ashley agreed to. Meanwhile, Dan's lawyer contacts Piper trying to work out a deal. The lawyer suggests that if Dan completes a 12-week parenting class and does therapy, he should get the kids back with a transition plan. Piper calls Ashley to discuss this, and Ashley puts her on speaker so I can hear. Piper actually laughs when she explains the offer and says absolutely not. These children are not bargaining chips. She tells Ashley the lawyer is trying to avoid a full custody battle because they know Dan's case is terrible. Piper says Dan needs to prove sustained change over time, not just check boxes on a list, and even then he'd need to start with supervised visits and work his way up over months or years. Ashley agrees immediately and tells Piper to reject the offer. The lawyer calls back trying to negotiate, but Piper shuts it down completely. 4 weeks after Dan dumped the kids on my doorstep, he makes his biggest mistake yet. He posts on Facebook about how his family betrayed him and kept him from his children. The post is long and rambling, talking about how he's a good father who just needed temporary help and everyone turned against him. He writes that I kidnapped his kids and took them to another state, that Ashley is poisoning them against him, that his parents won't even answer his calls. He says he's being denied his rights as a father and asks for support. Within an hour, several of his friends comment with supportive messages about how awful we all are. Then Ashley sees the post. She screenshots Dan's entire text history with her, including the messages where he begged her to come back while complaining about having to watch his own kids. She screenshots his Venmo requests asking her for money for guitar equipment while the kids needed clothes. She posts the full story with all the receipts, explaining exactly what Dan did and how he literally abandoned his children to focus on his music. She includes photos of the kids' medical records showing the neglect. The comments shift immediately. People start asking Dan what kind of father abandons toddlers on someone's doorstep. His friends from high school comment asking if this is really true. Someone who used to work with him says he's not surprised because Dan always blamed everyone else for his problems. More people pile on, sharing their own stories about Dan being unreliable and selfish. Dan deletes the original post within 3 hours, but it's too late. People have already screenshotted everything, and the images are spreading through our mutual friends. I start getting messages on Facebook from people I went to high school with. They ask if the story about Dan is true, and I confirm every detail. Then they start sharing their own experiences. Sarah Maynard tells me Dan borrowed $200 from her 7 years ago and never paid her back. Mike Fleming says Dan was supposed to be his roommate in college, but bailed a week before move-in, leaving Mike scrambling to find someone else. Jessica Gomez shares that Dan hit on her at a party while he was dating Ashley. The messages keep coming, and I realize Dan has been like this his entire adult life. He's always been the person who takes and never gives, who makes promises he doesn't keep, who expects everyone else to fix his problems. I feel validated reading these messages because it confirms I did the right thing. Meanwhile, the supervised visits are supposed to happen every Saturday afternoon at a neutral location. So Dan shows up to the first one after the social media disaster, but he's 40 minutes late. The court monitor notes this in her report. The second visit, he spends most of the time scrolling through his phone while Lily tries to show him a drawing. The third visit, he doesn't show up at all. He texts the monitor saying the time doesn't work with his recording schedule. The monitor documents this as another example of him prioritizing music over his children. After that, he just stops coming. The monitor tries to reschedule, but Dan says weekends are his prime creative time and he can't interrupt his process. This all goes into the official reports that will be presented to the judge. 2 months after everything started, Ashley and her parents drive to my house for a weekend visit. I'm standing on my front porch when their car pulls up and Lily jumps out running toward me. She's wearing a new purple backpack and she's so excited to show me all the pockets and zippers. Ben follows her and gives me a hug around my legs. They look completely different from those scared, crying toddlers I drove to Michigan. They're relaxed and happy and talking nonstop about their new preschool and their friends and the playground near their house. Ashley looks different too, less stressed and more confident. Her parents unload bags from the car and Iris hugs me, thanking me again for making the call that started everything. We spend Saturday at the playground near my house. Lily goes down the slide about 50 times and Ben plays in the sandbox. Ashley sits on the bench next to me and we watch the kids play. She tells me they're both sleeping through the night now and eating better. Lily's teacher says she's one of the brightest kids in her class, and Ben is starting to use full sentences. On Sunday, we make cookies in my kitchen. The kids stand on chairs next to the counter and help pour ingredients. Ben gets flour all over himself, and Lily eats half the chocolate chips before they make it into the dough. It's messy and chaotic, but in a good way. That evening, after the kids are in bed in my guest room, Ashley and I sit on my couch drinking wine. She thanks me for making the hard choice to bring them to her instead of trying to keep them myself. She says she knows it would have been easier for me to just deal with Dan and keep the kids local, but taking them to Michigan gave them the stable home they needed. I tell her I'm just glad they're okay. The next morning, they pack up to drive back to Michigan and the kids hug me goodbye. As I watch their car pull away, I feel good about everything. 3 weeks later, Piper calls Ashley to tell her the full custody hearing is scheduled for 3 months after the original abandonment. Piper says they have mountains of evidence showing Dan's unfitness and Ashley's excellent care. She has Bodie's evaluation, the court monitor's reports, the medical records, the supervised visit documentation, and statements from multiple people about Dan's pattern of irresponsibility. Piper tells Ashley to prepare for testimony about the past 6 months with Dan and the past 2 months with the kids. They schedule several prep sessions to go over everything. Ashley sounds nervous on the phone when she tells me about it, but I remind her she has everything on her side. The hearing date arrives 3 weeks later, and I drive back to Michigan the night before. Ashley puts me up in her parents' guest room, and we stay up late going over everything one more time. She's nervous but ready, and Piper has prepared her well for what to expect. The next morning, we all drive to the courthouse together. Ashley's parents are dressed up nice, and they both hug Ashley before we go inside. The courtroom is smaller than I expected, with wood paneling and fluorescent lights that make everything look washed out. We sit at a table on one side with Piper and wait for Dan to show up. He walks in 20 minutes late wearing a wrinkled button-up shirt that looks like he slept in it. His lawyer is this older guy in a cheap suit who keeps shuffling papers around like he's disorganized. The judge is a woman in her 50s with reading glasses on a chain, and she looks annoyed before anything even starts. Dan's lawyer stands up first and starts talking about how Dan has been struggling with his mental health. He says Dan was going through a crisis when he left the kids and he needs therapy, not punishment. The lawyer keeps using words like undiagnosed anxiety and overwhelming stress, and he makes it sound like Dan is the victim here. The judge listens without any expression on her face. She asks Dan's lawyer if he has any documentation of this mental health crisis. The lawyer admits he doesn't have any medical records because Dan hasn't actually seen a doctor. The judge writes something down and her mouth gets tight. Then it's my turn to testify. I walk up to the witness stand and put my hand on the Bible and swear to tell the truth. Piper asks me to describe what happened that Friday, and I tell the whole story again. This time I don't just talk about the abandonment. I talk about how Dan has always avoided responsibility his whole life. I tell the judge about the time he quit 3 jobs in 1 year because he didn't like his managers. I describe how he borrowed money from our parents and never paid it back. I explain how he's been trying to be a musician for 10 years, but he's never actually finished recording an album or played a real paid gig. The judge starts asking me questions directly. She wants to know about Dan's employment history, and I have to admit I don't think he's had a steady job in at least 2 years. She asks about financial support for the kids, and I tell her Ashley was paying for everything when they were together. She asks if Dan ever took the kids to doctor appointments, and I say I don't think, so based on what Ashley told me. Dan is sitting at his table getting red in the face while I talk. His lawyer objects a few times, but the judge overrules him. When I'm done testifying, I go back to sit with Ashley and she squeezes my hand. Then Ashley takes the stand. She looks scared, but she keeps her voice steady. Piper asks her about the 6 months before she left Dan, and Ashley describes it all in detail. She talks about working double shifts as a waitress while Dan stayed home supposedly watching the kids. She explains how she'd come home at midnight after being on her feet for 10 hours and find the kids still awake because Dan was in the garage recording videos. She tells the judge about finding Lily and Ben in dirty diapers because Dan got too focused on mixing his guitar tracks. She describes the morning she found an empty fridge because Dan spent the grocery money on a new microphone. Ashley starts crying when she talks about Ben asking why Daddy doesn't play with them anymore. The judge hands her a tissue box and tells her to take her time. Ashley pulls herself together and keeps going. She tells the judge about Dan's 30 followers on his music channel. She explains how he'd spend hours editing videos that got maybe 5 views. She describes begging him to get a real job and him saying she didn't believe in his dreams. By the time Ashley is done testifying, Dan looks like he wants to disappear. The judge calls a 10-minute recess and we all go out into the hallway. Ashley's mom hugs her and tells her she did great. Then the pediatrician testifies. She's a young doctor with her hair in a bun and she has Ben and Lily's medical records with her. She points out all the missed vaccine appointments. She shows the judge photos of Lily's untreated cavity that got so bad it needed emergency dental work. She explains that Ben was underweight for his age when Ashley first brought him in. The judge asks if this level of medical neglect is common and the pediatrician says no, most parents are much more attentive. After her comes the daycare director from Dan's area. She's an older woman who looks tired and she doesn't hold back. She testifies that Dan was frequently late for pickup, sometimes by hours. She describes the time he forgot to pick up Ben completely, and they had to call the emergency contact at 10 at night. She tells the judge about the days Dan would drop the kids off without their lunch or extra clothes. She says the staff started keeping spare supplies just for Lily and Ben because Dan was so unreliable. Dan's lawyer tries to cross-examine her, but she just repeats the same facts. Then Dan has to testify. He walks up to the stand looking defensive, and his lawyer asks him softball questions. Dan starts talking about how hard it is to be a single dad. He blames Ashley for leaving him when he needed support. He says his sister overreacted by taking the kids to Michigan. He claims he only meant for them to stay with me for a few days while he got his head together. The judge interrupts him and asks directly why he told me he'd pick them up when Lily turned 18. Dan stammers and says he was joking. The judge asks if he thinks abandoning toddlers is funny. Dan starts backtracking and saying he was stressed and didn't mean it that way. The judge asks about his employment and Dan admits he doesn't have a regular job right now. She asks how he's supporting himself and he says he does odd jobs and gets help from friends. She asks about the music career and Dan gets animated talking about his vision and his sound. The judge lets him go on for a minute, then cuts him off. She asks how many paid gigs he's had in the last year. Dan says none, but he's building his online presence. She asks how much money he's made from his music. Dan admits it's $0. The judge asks how he planned to support 2 children with no income. Dan starts saying that's why he needed them to stay with his sister who has a good job. The judge tells him that's not how parenting works. Dan gets frustrated and starts saying everyone is against him. He says Ashley poisoned the kids against him. He blames me for interfering. He says his parents never supported his dreams. The judge tells him to stop blaming everyone else and take responsibility for his own actions. Dan keeps arguing, and the judge warns him she'll hold him in contempt if he doesn't calm down. Dan finally shuts up, but he's breathing hard and glaring at everyone. The judge calls another recess, and this one lasts 30 minutes. We sit in the hallway and nobody talks much. Ashley's dad gets us all coffee from a vending machine. When we go back in, the judge has clearly made her decision. She goes through everything point by point. She talks about the abandonment and Dan's lack of employment. She mentions the medical neglect and the daycare incidents. She discusses Dan's inability to take responsibility and his focus on music over his children. Then she announces her ruling. Ashley gets full legal and physical custody of both kids. Dan can have supervised visitation, but only if he completes parenting classes and maintains steady employment for 6 months. The judge makes it clear that supervised means a professional monitor, not just a family member. She sets up a schedule for Dan to prove he's making changes before he can even request more access. Before the judge even finishes reading the order, Dan stands up and storms toward the door. His lawyer tries to stop him, but Dan shoves past and leaves the courtroom. His lawyer apologizes to the judge and says his client is having trouble accepting the consequences of his choices. The judge looks unimpressed and tells the lawyer to get his client under control. Then she signs the custody order and hands it to Piper. Ashley starts crying the second it's official. Her parents are hugging her and Iris is crying too. Dominic shakes Piper's hand and thanks her. Piper tells Ashley this was one of the clearest custody cases she's ever handled. She says Dan made it easy by being exactly who everyone said he was. We all go out for lunch after and Ashley can barely eat because she's so relieved. 3 months later, I drive to Michigan for Thanksgiving. The leaves are all gone from the trees and there's frost on the ground when I pull up to Ashley's parents' house. Before I even get out of my car, Lily comes running out the front door wearing a little sweater with a turkey on it. She jumps up and down yelling that Auntie is here. Ben follows her and he's gotten so much bigger in 3 months. They both hug me and drag me inside to show me everything. The house smells like turkey and pie and Ashley's mom is in the kitchen with an apron on. Ashley comes out of the living room and she looks completely different from that stressed person I drove to Michigan months ago. The kids are calling her mama now without any hesitation. They call Iris and Dominic grandma and grandpa and it sounds natural. We all sit down for dinner and the table is huge with so much food. Lily tells me about her preschool and how she can write her name now. Ben shows me a picture he colored of a turkey. The whole house feels like a real family home, warm and stable and full of love. After dinner, I help clean up and Ashley tells me the kids barely mention Dan anymore. She says they're sleeping through the night and eating well and their teachers say they're thriving. That evening, I call my parents to check in. My mom answers and she sounds sad. She tells me Dan didn't show up for Thanksgiving at their house. She says she cooked his favorite dishes hoping he'd come, but he never called or texted. My dad gets on the phone and he's less sympathetic. He says Dan needs to grow up and face what he's done. He tells me he's proud of how I handled everything and that Ashley is doing a great job with the kids. My mom admits she's not surprised Dan didn't show up. She says he's always run away when things get hard, and maybe this time he'll finally learn. I tell them about Lily and Ben at dinner and how happy they are. My mom cries a little, but she says she's glad they're okay. Before I hang up, my dad says those kids are better off, and sometimes the hardest thing is accepting that your own child isn't capable of being a parent. I sit in Ashley's guest room that night thinking about how everything worked out. Dan made his choice when he drove away that day. We all made ours by putting those kids first. The next morning, I wake up early and call my mom before I drive back home. She answers on the second ring and asks how Thanksgiving was. I tell her about Lily and Ben at dinner, how happy they looked, how they call Ashley Mama now without any confusion. Then I admit something that's been bothering me for weeks. I tell her I felt guilty at first, like maybe I should have tried to keep the kids myself instead of driving them to Michigan. There's silence on the other end and I think maybe the call dropped. But then my mom says she's glad I'm being honest about those feelings. She tells me I did exactly the right thing getting them to someone who was ready and able to be their parent. She says Ashley wanted those kids and had the support system to raise them properly, while I was caught completely off guard with no preparation. My mom reminds me that being a good aunt doesn't mean I had to become an instant mother, and that recognizing my limits was actually the responsible choice. I feel this weight lift off my shoulders hearing her say that. We talk for another 20 minutes about the kids and how well they're doing, and before we hang up, she tells me she's proud of how I handled everything. I pack up my stuff and say goodbye to Ashley and the kids. Lily hugs my legs and asks when I'm coming back. I tell her I'll visit again soon. 3 weeks later, Ashley calls me while I'm at work. I step outside to take the call and she sounds both nervous and excited. She tells me she's been thinking about this for a while, and she's decided to legally adopt Lily and Ben if Dan continues to be absent from their lives. I ask if she's sure and she says she's never been more certain about anything. The kids call her Mama, they're settled and happy, and Dan has shown zero interest in being their father. Ashley says her parents are completely supportive and have already updated their wills to include Lily and Ben as their grandchildren. Iris and Dominic met with their lawyer last week to make everything official on their end. I tell Ashley this is amazing news and ask what the process looks like. She explains that Piper is already working on the paperwork, and they'll need to prove Dan has abandoned his parental responsibilities. Given everything that's happened, Piper thinks they have a strong case. Ashley's voice gets emotional when she talks about making this permanent, about being their real mom legally and not just in their hearts. I tell her she already is their real mom in every way that matters. 4 months after Dan dumped the kids on my doorstep, I get a text from Piper with an update. Dan completed exactly 1 parenting class out of the 12 he was supposed to finish. He showed up to the first session and then never went back. The instructor tried calling him multiple times, but Dan ignored every message. Even worse, Dan lost his part-time job at the music store because he kept showing up late or not at all. His boss gave him 3 warnings before finally firing him 2 weeks ago. Piper says this means Dan isn't meeting any of the judge's requirements for regaining custody, or even getting unsupervised visits. She's documenting everything for the adoption case. I text back asking how Ashley is handling this news. Piper says Ashley isn't surprised at all because this is exactly who Dan has always been. She says the more Dan fails to step up, the stronger their case becomes for terminating his parental rights. Part of me feels sad that my brother is throwing away his own children like this. But a bigger part of me is relieved because it means Lily and Ben get to stay where they're safe and loved. The court monitor assigned to Dan's case reaches out to schedule his supervised visits. She leaves him 3 voicemails over 2 weeks. She sends him 5 emails with different date and time options. Dan doesn't respond to any of them. The monitor calls Piper to report that she cannot fulfill her duties if the parent won't communicate or show up. Piper documents this continued abandonment as more evidence for the adoption case. She adds it to a growing file that shows Dan's complete lack of interest in his children's lives. The monitor notes in her official report that Dan has made 0 effort to see his kids despite multiple opportunities being offered. This isn't a parent who wants custody but faces obstacles. This is a parent who walked away and never looked back. Piper tells me this kind of documentation makes adoption cases much easier because it proves the parent has voluntarily abandoned their rights. She says judges take this very seriously, especially when young children are involved. I start driving to Michigan once a month to visit. The first Saturday of every month, I make the 6-hour drive and spend the weekend with Ashley and the kids. Lily and Ben get so excited when I arrive. They run to the door yelling that Auntie is here and jump up and down until I pick them both up. They drag me inside to show me their new toys and drawings and books. Ben has a collection of toy cars now that he lines up on the coffee table. Lily draws pictures of their family with stick figures labeled Mama, Grandma, Grandpa, Ben, and Auntie. I'm always included in her drawings and it makes my heart feel full. We go to the park and I push them on the swings. We make cookies in Iris's huge kitchen and they help pour ingredients while getting flour everywhere. I love being the fun aunt who shows up once a month for adventures and then goes home. I get to be part of their lives without the constant responsibility of parenting. It's the perfect balance for me. 5 months after everything started, Ashley enrolls the kids in an excellent preschool program near her parents' house. The school has a great reputation and a waiting list, but Dominic knows someone on the board and pulled some strings to get them in. Lily goes 5 mornings a week and Ben goes 3 mornings. Ashley sends me pictures of their first day with little backpacks and new shoes. 2 weeks later, she calls to tell me how well they're doing. Lily is already learning to read simple words and can write her whole name. Ben is working on colors and shapes and can count to 10. Their teachers say both kids are bright and engaged, always participating and asking questions. The teachers also mention how well-adjusted they seem, which surprises them given the recent upheaval in their lives. Ashley tells the teachers about the stable home environment and all the support from her parents. The preschool director comments that you can tell when kids feel secure, and Lily and Ben clearly feel safe and loved. My parents finally meet Ashley's parents at one of my monthly visits. I coordinate the whole thing, making sure everyone comes to Michigan on the same weekend. My mom is nervous about meeting Iris and Dominic because she knows they're wealthy and she feels bad that her own son caused this whole mess. But the second they all sit down together in the living room, the tension disappears. Iris brings out coffee and homemade cookies. Dominic asks my dad about his work and they discover they both love fishing. My mom watches Lily and Ben play and her eyes get teary. She tells Iris and Dominic that she's so grateful they're giving her grandchildren the stability they need. She apologizes for Dan's behavior even though it's not her fault. Iris reaches over and squeezes my mom's hand, telling her that the kids are loved, and that's all that matters. Dominic says they're happy to be grandparents, and that family is what you make it. My dad nods and says Dan made his choice when he drove away that day. Everyone agrees the kids are better off now. By the end of the visit, my parents and Ashley's parents exchange phone numbers and promise to stay in touch. Dan surfaces briefly in month 5 with a text to Ashley asking for money. The text says he's about to get a big break with his music and just needs some cash to cover studio time for recording his demo. He promises to pay her back as soon as his career takes off. He doesn't ask about the kids. He doesn't ask how they're doing or if they need anything. The entire message is about him and his music and what he needs. Ashley shows me the text and I can see the anger in her eyes. She blocks his number immediately without responding. Then she forwards the screenshot to Piper. Piper adds it to the file as further evidence of Dan's priorities. She points out to the court that Dan has made no effort to see his children in 5 months, but has no problem reaching out when he wants money. This kind of behavior makes it very clear where Dan's focus lies, and it's not on being a father. Piper says this text might actually help their case more than hurt it because it shows Dan's true character so clearly. 6 months after Dan abandoned his kids on my doorstep, I'm back to my normal work routine. I go to the office 5 days a week, work on tax returns and financial statements, meet with clients about their accounting needs. On the surface, everything looks the same as it did before that Friday. But I'm different now in ways I didn't expect. I'm closer to Ashley than I've ever been, bonded by what we went through together and our shared love for those kids. I talk to her at least twice a week and visit Michigan once a month. I have better boundaries with Dan, which really means I have no contact with him at all. I blocked his number after he sent me angry texts calling me a traitor. I'm proud of the choice I made that day to drive those kids to safety instead of trying to handle everything myself. I know I did the right thing even when it was hard. My life has more meaning now because I'm part of something bigger than just my job and my quiet house. I'm auntie to 2 amazing kids who are growing up safe and loved. That matters more than I ever expected it would. Ashley starts the formal adoption process with Piper's help. They file the paperwork to terminate Dan's parental rights based on abandonment. The petition includes all the documentation Piper has been collecting for 6 months. Dan's failure to complete parenting classes, his refusal to respond to the court monitor, his lack of employment, his complete absence from the kids' lives, the medical neglect before he abandoned them. Every piece of evidence builds a clear picture of a man who chose his own wants over his children's needs. Ashley has to fill out pages of forms about her income, her living situation, her support system, her plans for the kids' future. Iris and Dominic provide financial statements showing they can help support the children. Character references come from the pediatrician, the preschool teachers, neighbors, and family friends. Everyone agrees this adoption is what's best for Lily and Ben. The kids are thriving in Ashley's care with her parents' support. Dan has shown no genuine effort to be a parent and has actually gone out of his way to avoid his responsibilities. Piper tells Ashley the case is as strong as any she's seen. Now they just have to wait for the court date and hope the judge sees what everyone else can see so clearly. 7 months after everything started, I'm at Ashley's house for the weekend and Lily is showing me her room. She points to a photo on her dresser and says it's from their old house, then immediately starts telling me about the new swing set in the backyard. No sadness, no questions about when they're going back. Just a simple fact that they used to live somewhere else, and now they live here. Ben doesn't mention Dan at all anymore. He calls Ashley Mama and runs to Dominic when he wants to play trucks. The kids are just kids now, not scared toddlers asking for daddy. I watched them during dinner that night, laughing at something Iris said, fighting over who gets the last roll, completely secure in their world. Sitting there at that table, I have this moment where I understand that Dan actually gave me something by being so terrible. I got pulled into this amazing support system. I learned I could make hard choices under pressure. I found out I'm way stronger than I thought I was back when I spent my weekends alone in my big empty house. I would never thank Dan for what he did to those kids, but I can admit that my life is better now because I was forced to step up. Ashley and I are doing dishes after the kids go to bed and she brings up Christmas plans. Her parents want me to come stay for the whole week, not just Christmas Day. She tells me I'm family now, that we're bonded by what we went through together, and by our love for Lily and Ben. I realize she's right. I get invited to birthday parties and summer barbecues. I'm in the family photo albums. Iris texts me funny things the kids said. This is the close family connection I always wanted, but never had growing up. My life has this rhythm now that feels right. I work my accounting job during the week, visit Michigan once a month, video chat with the kids every few days. Lily shows me her artwork and Ben makes me watch him do somersaults. Ashley sends me updates about preschool and doctor appointments. The kids are safe and loved with everything they need. Ashley turned out to be an incredible mom with her parents backing her up. I'm the aunt who helped make it all happen, the one who drove 6 hours that first night instead of trying to handle everything alone. Dan made his choice when he drove away from my house that Friday. He picked his music over his children. We made our choice too, all of us together, and we picked those kids first. That's the difference that matters.